Hey, what's up, guys? And today I wanted to have a discussion on why I think Justice Hunter's format is the best format we've had pretty much ever, or at least since like tier format for the last couple of years. So I know recently people have been complaining about all the different formats in Yu-Gi-Oh! Snake Eye format, people were complaining. Cashier format, people were complaining. Rise on Mouse format, people were complaining. But now I see people just like praising the Justice Hunters format, which is like really a good thing to see for the game. Like a lot of people are actually enjoying playing the format, and there's good reason why. So before we get into like what makes this format so good, I think we have to talk about what makes a bad format, right? So I think one thing that makes a bad format is players don't like getting FTK'd. They don't want to play against decks like Snake Eye that are just one card combo full combos and just absolutely destroys them, and their end boards just have like almost no counterplay, right? But you want to be able to play Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't want to be able to like queue up for a game and then all of a sudden your opponent just like doesn't let you play. They're playing like it's basically like you're just comparing hands, right? Like that's not fun Yu-Gi-Oh! That makes like it's just a pretty bad format overall. Like I said, Snake Eye could do that. Last format, Malice, kind of felt like that as well. Obviously, Ryzeal wasn't like that as much. Well, at least like pure Ryzeal. Once we got to like Mitsurugi Ryzeal, that pretty much became that as well. Because like Mitsurugi Ryzeal has so many different like FTK opportunities. Like not only is their end board just crazy, Detonator, Habakiri for like Murakumo, Cross, they get to draw a ton of cards too, which that's another thing that makes decks dumb, but that's like a side tangent. But like they also had access to like Ouroboros and like Protoss, and that just made interacting with them like super bad. It felt like if you didn't stop them turn one, you lost the game, which is not fun at all. When you compare that to like Justice Hunter's format, it's like you have Yummy, which yes, Yummy does a lot with one card, but their end board is very counterable. You have there are a lot of good cards against Yummy where if you draw them, you could actually put in a good situation to be able to break their board. Yummy comboing off, making their end board turn one, is not a sign that the game is over. When you're playing against one of those other decks, when they combo off, if it gets to when your turn starts, you probably lost the game. That is not necessarily the case for Yummy, which is pretty cool. And kind of going on top of that, players want to feel some type of agency in their game. Even if they don't actually have agency, they want to feel like they have a chance to win. So I feel like part of that is like making sure there aren't that many like negates in the format or omni negates. Because when you're going second into a board, right, and you're playing against omni negates, it feels really bad. Your opponent's just telling you no, like you cannot activate this card. No, you cannot activate that card, right? Whereas you're playing against disruptions that aren't omni negates, it doesn't feel as bad. It feels like you have like more of a chance to win, even if like the win rate is like the same going second. And obviously this format does have some negates. Herald of the Arclight isn't most notable, but Herald is a lot easier to deal with than some of the other negates, and it's only like pretty much just Herald. Like obviously dracotail has like Flame, which is like a spell negate, but at the same time it only targets face-up cards, so it's super easy to deal with. You do have ways to counter it, and it doesn't feel, it's not an omni negate, right? I feel like another thing that makes a bad format, and this is super subjective, but I feel like when there's only like 1 to 2 decks, that makes like a format, people don't enjoy that type of format. And from a very competitive player standpoint, those formats aren't necessarily bad, but for most players, they like a format that's very wide open, so they like can play the deck they want to play. Because most players like don't want to be forced to play a deck just because it's the only way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! It's the only way to be able to compete. Most players want to be able to play the deck they want to play, and they want to like make that deck as good as possible. Obviously, from a super competitive player standpoint, they're trying to pick the deck that's giving them the best percentage chance of winning, but most players aren't like that. So I think from looking at it like overall, I think that is something that makes like a format like not great. Justice Hunter's format, yes, the Justice Hunters decks are better than the other decks, generally speaking. Like for example, like look at the rogue decks before Justice Hunters, Memento, Mermel, etc. Justice Hunters decks eclipse those decks very heavily. However, because of the way the Justice Hunters decks are, there are a lot of silver, I don't want to say silver bullets, but there are a lot of really good cards against like decks like Yummy and Dracotail that make it so that like any deck can compete, right? For example, let's say you're playing like a deck like Memento, right? Yes, overall, Yummy is a better deck than Memento. But you can play a deck, you can play the good cards against Yummy and still feel like you have a decent chance at winning against Yummy, even if you're on like a weaker deck, which I feel like is a really good sign of a format. Because it helps like the majority of players, you know. They're not forced, even though their deck isn't as good, they're not forced to play another deck because they feel like they can play non-engine to help deal with those like good decks. When you look at past formats, that didn't really feel like the case, just because like the decks were so like durable, like they were so strong versus non-engine. Like look like a deck like Malice. Malice isn't the best example because every deck could play Lancia, but like versus other non-engine, the deck kind of just like destroyed. You know, so I feel like that's like a sign of a really nice format. Another good thing for a good format is going to be when there are lots of decisions to make. I think in general, skill is in Yu-Gi-Oh! People say they want skillful games. Not everybody wants games that are 100% decided by skill, but I think something that makes the games in Justice Hunter's format more skillful is that there are a lot more decisions to make than in previous formats, you know? There are a lot more cards to keep track of, a lot more effects you have to worry about, things from your opponent, and because the disruption isn't just like hard negates, there are a lot more factors you have to keep in mind when using your disruption, right? You can't just be like negate. Let's say you end up with a board that just has like a bunch of negates, right? You can't just be like negate every card your opponent activates. You don't have to think about how you use your disruption most of the time. Whereas if you're playing a deck like Yummy, yes, you have Arclight, but you actually have to think about how you use your disruption because it's kind of limited and it's not like just negates. So your opponent has more ways to interact with like disruption that isn't negates, like Book of Moon. Like for example, you can Book of Moon your opponent's monsters. But you also have to keep in mind, like, Zhao Long, if you're playing against Vanquish Soul, Zhao Long can flip them face up, you know? There's just a lot of, like, cool interactions like that in the format, which are really important. And I think, like, all those little niche interactions are going to make the big difference between, like, who's a good player in this format and who's not a good player in this format. So I think it's really nice. Another thing that I think actually makes this format kind of cool is that you can play on turn 0. Yummy can't really do that, but Dracotail can do that, and also Vanquish Soul could do that. So before I said people didn't want to play against solitaire decks, and like when you're using hand traps, it doesn't feel like you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Using a hand trap is not really fun. However, if you're playing like Vanquish Soul or you're playing like Dracotail, if you're playing on the opponent's turn with your engine, even if you end up losing the game like that turn, it still feels more fun than just like hand trapping them generically. So for example, let's say you're playing Vanquish Soul and you play with Mizuna and Holy Seal in the opponent's turn, right? Let's say they end up winning that, they end up making like a unbreakable board still that through your hand traps. That felt more fun for the Vanquish Soul player, generally speaking, than it did to use like a Veiler or Imperm your opponent to play through it, you know? You actually got to use some of your engine, play some of your cards, and I feel like people just enjoy that more. Another reason I think the format is better is that the decks are kind of affordable. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk in the community recently about like you know, sets being bad and whatever. And Justice Hunter's format, a lot of the decks are just super cheap. You know, the cores. Dracotail, I think it recently just got bought out. I'm not gonna lie, but like at least by meta. But like the core was like 60, 70 USD or something like that. That's, or maybe even less. Like that's super cheap. You know, like even like Yummy wasn't more than like 140 for the core. You know, a deck like K9. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I think the Vanquish Soul cards help the price go up a little bit, but like there are like budget-ish options. Like I like when like the bulk of the cost of the decks are in the non-engine. I think that's pretty cool. So, and even like a lot of non-engine isn't super expensive. So I think the format being like relatively affordable is like nice for a lot of players too. I talked to a lot of people, they're just like, they're picking up multiple Justice Hunters decks just because the cards are that cheap. So I think that's really cool for it to see. Obviously you can argue how great it is for like health of sets, but I think in terms of for how happy it makes the players pretty happy. And kind of tagging on to what I said before, I think there are a lot of options in the format, a lot of decks you can play, even if you're not playing a Justice Hunters deck. Because like I said, even though the Justice Hunters decks are better, other decks still, like, you can still play good cards in the other decks to make your matchups like feel kind of close, right? Even if it isn't really that close in theory. So I think that's really cool. The format isn't perfect though, I want to say that. There are some issues with the format, of course. Number one, I think that I would like to see Malice hit. I think that deck is a bit too degenerate. I think Mitsurugi Raizo does have access to some degenerate things that I would like to see go. At least Mitsurugi, like, you know, like Protoss, like Ouroboros, even though they won't see that much play. Also, in terms of Vanquish Soul, I think Paradise Smasher is a card that should be banned. Paradise Smasher makes that, like, cards that might normally be pretty good against Vanquish Soul, you get punished for hand trapping them, which I don't really like. That's like my one gripe with the format is Azuna. Even though Azuna is a really good card, don't get me wrong, I mean, it's a fun card. I like the card a lot, balance wise, but I also kind of don't, because it kind of punishes you for like using like hand trapping your opponent, which I don't really enjoy those type of cards. It's kind of like a talent. It's basically like talents. I'm not gonna lie. It basically is a talents. They function pretty similar going first. You know, you get hand trapped, look at your opponent's hand, and then you can keep playing. Azuna kind of does the same thing, because when you threaten Ripper, that basically says you're looking at your opponent's hand. I mean, you're not really looking at their hand, but like the main purpose of talents, you like rip the second hand trap, right? Ripper Azuna basically does that, but like imagine the second hand trap's like Nib. I just have a monster negate now, and I still like get the search and engine card. So I'm not a big fan of Azuna in the format, especially while Paradise Smash is legal, because it makes that like there is no like turn two, like you pretty much like lose. Like I don't want to say you lose, because like sometimes making Paradise Smasher doesn't win you the game, but I think Paradise Smasher with Azuna is a bit of a degenerate combination, so I would like to see Paradise Smasher banned. But aside of that, I don't really have too many gripes with the format. Anyway, that was it. I know I rambled a lot in the video. I don't really have like a script down or anything like that. I was kind of like going off the top of my head. But I hope you enjoyed. I hope you resonate with some of the things I said, and I hope you're enjoying the format as well. Which I think most of you probably are, because a lot of people I know are enjoying the format. And the format feels really skillful. It feels like if you lose, you probably messed up. And not 100% obviously. And if you win, if you like, there are a lot of ways you can outplay your opponent as well, which I think is really nice to see. But yeah, like I said before, no format is perfect. The format is definitely not perfect. I think there are some things that could be improved, but I think this format is really good. And honestly, I think it's the best format we've had in years. Definitely from a competitive standpoint, definitely the best format since tier format, 100%. The most skillful format for sure, I think. And I hope after the ban list, it gets better. But anyway, that was it. I hope you enjoyed it, like I said. And if you, yeah, just take care.